Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is Brock Beard from lastcar.info, just coming back from the ISM Raceway. I realize that this is much later on the East Coast. It's what is it? Is it 8:33 or is it 7:33? I think I don't even know. I can't tell you what time it is because we've just adjusted from Mountain Time back. It looks like it's 7:30 right now, Pacific Time. Yeah, so I know it's about 10:30 Eastern right now. So if you guys aren't able to watch this live right now, I hope you excuse doing this at the time here. But we'll go ahead and just do the wrap-up show while the memories are fresh and everything. We're just getting back from the weekend's action at the Phoenix back down in Phoenix. First of all, I want to thank you all for following along with our action there this weekend with Cup, Xfinity, and Trucks. And we're going to be talking about the action here. I should post the link in the Twitter first. Let me do that so I don't forget. Whoop, I got notifications there. All right. Disqualification. Shoe. Wrapping up. ISM Raceway is now live. Join. All right. Dude. Okay. All right. So yeah, didn't get a lot of comments on that, but I want to kind of go ahead and just jump right into this here since we just came back from the track there. Just drove in about half an hour ago, getting back into the swing of things out here. But again, as I mentioned earlier, thank you so much to everyone who followed us through the race weekend there at the ISM Raceway. It was a stacked weekend there. We had plenty of material to cover. We tried to get the as many quotes as possible from the drivers and teams to get into the Truck, Xfinity, and Cup Series races. We'll go over all of that tonight, and if anybody else joins in here, we'll do a bit of trivia here as well to kind of wrap things up. But quite a bit of ground to cover from all three of the series over this past weekend, and my goodness. It's still kind of settling in a little bit. I almost thought about doing this tomorrow, but I think I'm going to go ahead and just power through and try to do this in tonight. Hey, what's going on, that racing kid? Welcome aboard. I know, again, as we have a later show tonight, but for those of you who aren't able to join in here, I hope it'll still be something that you guys can check out at your leisure here afterwards. And but what a weekend, my goodness. I mean, between all three of the series, it's interesting to see how everything shook out for each of the divisions, with the championship so close in the balance. But I mean, really, just where to begin, quite honestly. Looking at the back of the field, first of all, let's start off with that. Chase Elliott has now somehow moved his way into the last car championship after falling out of the championship 4 with a last place finish there at Phoenix. That ended up being kind of a bizarre race to cover there from the garage area. Last year in this race, I spent a good amount of time in the media center just watching the back of the field there before Timmy Hill pulled his car behind the wall and kind of began a bit of a battle amongst some of the other smaller teams back there. This one, it ended up being the 5th most laps complete of any last place finisher at Phoenix. And so we had a situation where it was very unclear who it was going to be. Both Reed Sorensen and Joey Gase losing several laps throughout the event and falling further and further back, but all 39 cars still running. Now, I know I've seen a lot of complaints already about ISM Raceway and the potential of it being a championship race next year where it's already scheduled. What kind of a show is it going to put on next year compared to what we're going to get at Homestead next week and what we've had in Homestead races in the past? It could be up in the air. The big thing I thought was really noticeable during that entire race was how everybody fanned out into the dog leg and how I have no idea how they can do that without wrecking. It seems like it's only a matter of time till they all fan out like 3 and 4 wide through there, then get back to 2 wide into the new turn 2. and how they're able to do that without actually wadding them all up. I mean, it's been really really crazy to see, but an interesting set of circumstances with all of that. But it's been an unusual deal, kind of shaking everything out there. But Chase Elliott, yeah, your last place finisher there for the Cup Series race. Highly unusual situation there. Him getting eliminated with the flat left rear tire that sent him into the outside wall. The wreck taking him out of the championship after a really spirited battle with Denny Hamlin through a lot of that race there. It's too bad that the things didn't quite work out for him in that sense. But as we look ahead, indeed, to the LASCAR Championship, we're still waiting for the entry list to be coming out here for Homestead this week. But depending on who is actually in the list, it's going to come down to BJ McLeod, Michael McDowell, Eric Jones, Chase Elliott, and potentially Cody Ware, depending on which of those 5 drivers is entered in the Cup Series race at Homestead. Any one of those can finish out the championship with last place finish. McLeod doesn't need to finish last, as he's already got the bottom 5 tiebreaker over both McDowell and Jones. So that's really the situation on that end. But really an unusual situation there with that. I mean, as you noticed from the article, I don't really have a quote from anything that happened with Chase Elliott. Obviously, when it's kind of a challenge when you have a big team finishing last versus another one, the driver is going to be very hard to get a hold of. I didn't make an attempt to go over to the infield care center when he was checked out, because I figured I wasn't going to get any different quotes than anybody else was going to be doing. So what I decided instead was to actually track the car as it was getting pulled in. And that ended up being kind of an unusual situation where he had wrecked and the car ended up being pulled into the garage area through a different entrance that was over just past the exit of turn 2, and pulled it into the garage area. They got pulled into the Xfinity Series garage, and the tow truck turned around, pulled it back out, brought it around to the Cup Series garage, because one thing that the ISM Raceway has a whole lot of, or just a bunch of gates just separating every section out. And even if your track officials are working with the tow trucks and everything, you're not going to be able to get from one spot to the other very easily. So an interesting set of circumstances there. But they did finally tow the car back into the garage area. A lot of personnel protecting the back of that car and making sure nobody else was getting too close. There was, it's no exaggeration, there were 2 guards, one of them holding a hand very close to his sidearm there, keeping a very close eye on any fans that were getting a little bit too close. I guess concerned about any kind of issue with anybody seeing any aspect of the Hendrick Motorsports cars that perhaps they shouldn't. It is a competition, and all these teams are trying to eke out any kind of advantage they can over any other team there. So interesting deal there with that, and the team also hanging on to the pieces off the car. They're almost at sheet metal, but the fiberglass pieces off the car to actually be bringing them back over to between the haulers there. The rear, it was the rear spoiler piece and the rear deck lid assembly, as well as the vertical panel that forms the rear bumper of the car. Both of those were brought over by a crew member over to the hauler there, the garage area, and well out of sight. And then by the next time I walked by that scene, they were already gone. Likely keeping a close eye on all of that. Assuming a fan didn't go by and attempt to pick those up. Judging by the amount of security that was around there, I imagine that would have been not quite the smartest idea for somebody to do, but not sure what the situation was there on that. The JJ Yaley situation, where he qualified in the last spot, was something that was an interesting one there. I had a hard time getting a hold of Yaley at one point because I wanted to follow up with his the situation that caused his time to be disallowed there. It was then brought up by a member on social media there that it was an issue with the window net. It wasn't until Sunday morning that I was able to get a hold of him there, and I couldn't get onto pit road, but Yaley was really cool. I have to really commend JJ there for coming by and talking with me on pit road before Sunday's race and explaining that there was an issue there with the spring that was holding the window net in place. Spring failed. The thing looked like it was going to be activated, but then it wasn't. Started to come down the first lap and then came down the rest away on the second. Actually, speaking with my brother afterwards, he said that he actually didn't know that he was actually still doing a timed lap at the time because he saw the window net was down. It looked like he thought that he was actually done with his lap at that point, but clearly it ended up being activating an unusual rule, the NASCAR rule book, where if the window net isn't fully up, you have a situation where you're going to be sent to the back of the field, which is what happened. But Yaley actually had a decent run there with the Ware team, actually climbing back up through the field there, at least a few positions before the finish of the race. Ended up scoring a 29th place finish for him in the Factor One Source Pharmacy car. It was a really nice paint scheme, by the way. It looked really nice in person. But Yaley, actually, there were a couple times following Sorensen and the other teams in the back there where you could actually see Yaley putting a lap on those guys, just like with the rest of the leaders there. Yaley himself ended up being 6 laps down at the finish, but drivers like Reed Sorensen and Joe Nemechek and others ended up being much further back at the end of the day. But a different set of circumstances for those guys back there. It looked like it was going to come down to Sorensen and Gase. I really was thinking that we were going to have a situation where the two of them were going to be close to being on the same lap. And I was already looking ahead to perhaps it going the full distance, like a Michigan scenario. Seems almost unthinkable at a track like Phoenix, where statistically over, I believe, like the 46 races they'd run there's a large number of them where last places settled really well within like the first 20 to 30 laps. So highly unusual to have one go quite this far. Chase Elliott with 165 laps completed before his crash, and then taking last place from Reed Sorensen about 10 laps later. But it was an interesting scenario there, and it was different covering that race versus the Xfinity and Truck Series race, as we'll get into here along the way as well. Again, really covering the race the way that we do, you really have to keep an eye on the back of the field. It reminded me very much of Sears Point in that sense, which was also having long green flag runs and got a lot of complaints from fans about how competitive the race was and everything like that. I know there's a lot of concerns about the aero package that was definitely brought up during the media center interviews, both during the weekend and in particular after the race. It's Kyle Busch's very famous quote, being that, if you get the lead, bye-bye, that's it. That was really what creates a situation there with that, where you just can't get around anybody. And that's all she wrote. So Kyle Busch not quite able to beat his teammate Denny Hamlin. Hamlin doing the very utmost that he could to get that car into the championship after some lackluster results. Should have won Martinsville, then had the splitter tweaked at Texas. Great come from behind deal on that. As much as I don't like to really focus too much on the winners, because I know there's going to be a ton of media there, and that was certainly the case this time. There were so many media and well-wishers and everybody that were around both Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin's pit stalls, which are the first two pit stalls at the end of pit road. You really could barely see anything. I mean, the video is on my Twitter feed there from the last restart, I believe, till just after the checkered flag. And yeah, you can't really see hardly anything. You can see the track really well, though, from there. It's almost unfortunate they don't have grandstands looking from the infield outward, because there's a really impressive to see them driving down that banking and then onto the flat and coming through that way. It's almost like they're driving off the roof of a house or like a slalom or something. TV does it justice to a degree, but I mean, the degree of that banking after the 2011 reconfiguration, you really don't get a real good sense of that until you see it in person. Very much the opposite of Darlington, where you have these guys, you have basically a half car groove in the outside lane, and everybody's feathering it, even with the current package, to actually try to just keep it off the wall and stay in just where you need to be. This is very much the opposite. Everybody just fans out and, just does the very best they can to get as many spots as quickly as they can. And, especially in turns 1 and 2, it's all the way till you get to the backstretch and everybody can get kind of more or less single file. And, things are kind of settled from there. But that whole part of the track, I guess that's why they have the grandstands facing the opposite direction. I mean, obviously the sun being behind the stands makes it a lot better, but you're looking straight out to the part that has really the most critical component of the race there, going into the dog leg past the new start finish line and into 1 and 2. That definitely was where this race was settled, as Hamlin finally cleared Kyle Busch and Ryan Blaney behind him there. Joey Logano had a very frustrating afternoon there with that. Issues with the set of tires that took him out of contention after leading 93 laps, dropping him back to the 9th place position. I was really keeping an eye out, trying to see any other Cup teams that were having exceptionally good runs. One that I had myself overlooked was Paul Menard's 12th place finish. in one of his final starts. I mean, a fantastic run for him in the 21 car, kept his nose clean, and just came there to finish right ahead of Matt DiBenedetto. DiBenedetto is actually, it seems like it's a bit less of now of a surprise of how good he's been running again in the 95 car. Kind of reminds me of the RSS guys in the Xfinity series, but a great run for them. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had that problem with the tire, still came back and finished 19th. So that was a good recovery for him, and all that deal there. So, really, really interesting on that. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you raised the point there. Yeah, I mean, any pictures like exposed counterparts, exactly. It's there's a lot of proprietary information that these teams have to deal with and protect. I know that there was a lot of issues with that. I remember the same thing last year in this same race when Kurt Busch wrecked, and everybody keeping people away from the 41 car, and eventually putting it. I believe they put a tarp on it eventually, so that the side that was facing the crowd going by, they couldn't see anything, and they did that. So, and even on the media side, you have to be really careful about that too. I remember, I learned that the hard way starting out, that when you're taking pictures of the cars in the garage, you have to be very mindful not to get pictures of the hubs on the cars, because there's a lot of very different things that people do from one to the next, and they don't want everybody seeing that. So luckily, a lot of these phones nowadays, you can put an emoji or something over it, and people don't see it there, and that helps a lot. But try to stay on top of that. But it's kind of an unspoken rule, but definitely a good policy, as you can see from a lot of that. Yeah. But all in all, I mean, again, it was really a fun trip here. I mean, we enjoyed covering this race last year, but we've been looking ahead to covering it this year. It's unfortunate we couldn't do Texas. Our original plan was to do the door magnet and then have the trip from Texas to Phoenix. But we made it work though on that. I'm glad I appreciate again all our Patreon members that joined on there. And I already actually got a question on doing a magnet for next time. To clarify, yes. I mean, anybody else that is a member that was on the magnet this time, you'll automatically be on the next magnet that we do. And if anybody else joins up in the meantime, between now and whenever we set up the next trip, we'll add your name onto there. And of course, if you sign up during the race weekend that we go to, we'll handwrite you on there and enter that in there. One caveat we're going to be adding, though, on that too, just to make sure, is that the drawing for the magnet is going to remain among active members of the Patreon there. There wasn't an issue with these last two. Both people that won the magnets were active members of the Patreon, didn't change there. But I'm going to make sure that that's on there, so that certainly people that are still contributing on the website there are going to get their money's worth. But people that were already on there before, I still want to make sure your names are on there, because look, you've contributed to the website at any time, we're going to put your name on there and that. So the idea is, further and further along, we're going to get more and more names on there and get your exposure out there. It's been a really popular promotion, and we're looking ahead to doing that a lot more. It was a little bit of a challenge on the trip down there, I got to say, because it seemed like a lot of the locations we stopped at were just mostly gas stations and everything on the way. Although we did see some interesting sights between the Antique Steam Museum in Southern California, and then the Miniatures Museum from there. So we got some good pictures, at least in front of those places there as well. Certainly in California, history is kind of approached a little bit differently depending on locations there. A lot of the locations we ended up approaching were kind of at night, like the James Dean crash location. That was a big thing that we wanted to make sure that we went to this time. We meant to do it for our Fontana trip, but we just ran out of time there on that. But really appreciate everybody for being on board there for that. And congratulations again to the winner of the magnet. We did do the drawing earlier this afternoon before heading back tonight. For those of you in the Patreon who haven't seen it yet, just pull up my Twitter feed and the video will be on there. And then to the person who won it, again, congratulations, and make sure that I have your mailing address so that we can send that out. We'll get that sent out this week for you. But yeah, great trip down there. I mean, really enjoyed it. We kind of just took our time on this one. I think before we had tried to fit it into 1 day or 1.5 days. This time we kind of spread it into 2, and that made it so much nicer just getting down there. But, again, very pleased by the folks at the ISM Raceway, and really excited for people that we ran into along the way. Actually, one of the first people I ran into was a alumnus, gentleman named Richard, who's an alumnus of UC Irvine. and noticed my backpack, because actually the backpack I wear into the track is the same, is from my rowing days on the UC Irvine crew team. So it had the logo for the university there. So we had a nice conversation there, and he picked up a copy of my book on JD McDuffie. So I appreciate it again to him. If you're watching out there, Richard, again, thank you for your support on that. We got in there, got settled, and it was really pretty quick from there on in. I think we picked a great time to come by at the track, because the Truck Series garage was already open that morning on Friday when we first got there, and then the Xfinity garage opened after, and then the Cup Series one after that. It's really nice now that we're doing more of these races within the year, that we're able to catch up with different people along the way. I want to make sure I want to drop some names in here, in particular of some people that we met along the way. Let me get on the K&N. No, not in that series. Let's get in the K&N West. Definitely seeing the first West Series race seen in a while besides the Sears Point event. It was cool to see a lot of the same people that we've seen at Sears Point running at Phoenix. It was a nice little bonus there thrown into the Saturday schedule. But I want to talk big shout out to Tony Cosentino that we spoke to, as a jackman for Rick Ware Racing, who also is developing his racing career as well, driving the number 38 car, the K&N West Series. Did not finish last in that race. We had a little bit of joking about that on pit road on Sunday. But it was really cool to see him out there and competing with a lot of the other guys. A lot of interesting cars out there as well. I'm sure for those of you who saw the pictures of a number of those teams back there, certainly the number 34 that Josh Jackson drove, as well as the number 36 driven by Bobby Hillis Jr., seeing the different they're apparently fiberglass cars, but they had what looked to be like sheet metal style bodies. And from as far as I could tell, I mean, they look like fiberglass ones up close, but a different situation there with that. And running an old DEI chassis in the case, I believe it was the 34 car that was driven there. That was Jackson's car. So that was interesting, an interesting one to see. Seemed like they had a good sense of humor with some of these paint schemes. I know there was the Batman paint scheme on the number 8. The Khan family there between father and son racing against each other, and said society on the rear bumper. That was pretty funny. I don't know if that was intentional or not. I didn't get really a straight story on the sponsorship deal there with that, but perhaps they just had a little bit of fun with that. Corey Heim listed as the last place finisher actually of the K&N race. Looks like they had a disqualification here after the fact. Let's see. Placed last in the finishing order, ran an Ilmore engine. I didn't hear anything about that at the time there. That's interesting. They must have done something different with the 22 car there. I noticed he was lined up at the back of the field there where they rolled off, and I didn't really think anything of it. Because originally I was talking with Keith McGee there when he pulled into the garage area, and he had a seal failing on the car there and ended up pulling the car behind the wall. So we did an interview with him. Didn't do a full-on article on that one. It didn't really have anything prepared for the K&N series. It was focusing more on the top 3. Yeah, actually just look at the Racing Reference one. This is the first time I'm seeing of that there. So that's interesting. That's interesting. So I guess they just let him run out there whatever laps he could, but yeah, that one actually that's kind of knocking me a little sideways there. I didn't get a straight story on that. Bizarre, because even the official timing that must have been done after the race, because the official timing and scoring in the media center still showed McGee in the last spot. That must have been something either that was agreed upon, or I don't know if that was something that was found before. That's a weird one. So this was really the challenge this entire weekend, I got to say. I'm sounding a little scattered right now, and that's kind of the way that's been this entire weekend. There was so much stuff happening. It seemed like even more than last year. And it's not a cop out. I got to make sure I stay on top of the things I need to stay on top of and jump in there. But yeah, that's another storyline that just completely slipped me by on that one. I don't know what was going on with Heim, but yeah, I did notice. I don't know if he did even a qualifying lap. I know he was at the back of the field there, but apparently he had a lead lap finish, which at least put him in the top 11, if not top 12. But then yeah, classified last in that field. But lots of back and forth there. But Ty Gibbs taking the win there in that K&N race there, which is another feather in the cap for Coach Gibbs after Denny Hamlin's come from behind victory there in that deal. Sam Mayer got tangled up in the Truck Series race, ended up finishing runner-up in that deal. But an interesting set of circumstances there. Wow, goodness. Let's see. It was agreed upon to have Heim race despite not running the legal engine. Okay. Well, I guess just any kind of experience you can get, no matter what you're running there. That's kind of the deal. But yeah, I didn't speak to him on that. It would have been interesting to find out if that was something that was agreed upon. Are you saying that was agreed before the race, or is that something that just kind of, it must have been something that the officials were aware of? I don't think it was a case where, it doesn't sound like it was a case where it had slipped by anybody or anything. I mean, that's something that you would have noticed, the teams would have noticed, certainly in pre-race inspection. But yeah, let's we'll jump in here. So again, the Friday schedule, we kind of just kind of went around as much as we could there, going from one garage to the next, getting a lot of the pictures of the different teams and a lot of the different drivers coming through. We had a pretty stacked entry list storylines article that which was really helpful in kind of preparing for the action that was coming in. And then on the truck series side, we had that 3-truck battle between Norm Benning, who wasn't entered, Joe Nemechek, who was and was attempting all 3 of the races, and then the number 12 of Gus Dean, who had an outside chance of taking the last car truck series championship if he finished last in both Phoenix and Homestead. Going into Phoenix, however, Joe, was running all 3 of the races, and was, as was mentioned, and throughout the weekend there, that he was breaking the record for the number of starts in NASCAR that Richard Petty had, not 1,184 all in Cup, but 1185 now across all 3 of the divisions, kind of similar to a Kyle Busch deal. That extended through the 1,185th was his Cup Series start on Sunday for Premium Motorsports, finishing in that one. I wasn't sure going into it, and I didn't if Joe was actually going to be just running a few laps and then parking in those races. It definitely turned out to be that case, both in Friday and Saturday, but for different reasons, as far as I could tell in that case. Nemechek in the Truck Series race last year, when we were there, pulled out in the very beginning laps, pulled out of the race, was done for the night, clinched the last car Truck Series championship in that. This one, very similar situation, even though that we had the 51 truck spin and ultimately come back from that to finish in the 2nd spot there with Brandon Jones. But Nemechek dropping to the back of the field. Carson Ware, Cody Ware's brother, unfortunately had a bit of struggles there in the number 33 at the beginning of the race. He seemed to have real trouble keeping up with the pack. Just had whatever problems with the Riam brothers truck. I know that number 33 also had problems with brakes at Martinsville last time out when Riam himself was driving it. But unfortunately, Ware ended up falling out after 37 laps, citing electrical problems. But by that point, Derek Kraus had already been eliminated in an accident, and Nemechek had pulled his truck behind the wall. Nemechek made at least one unscheduled stop at the beginning of the race, came back in again, and then was done for the night. And that's where we introduced our first last car certificate. We printed those out here on this printer right here behind me before we left. And I had those prepared in case the Truck, Xfinity, or Cup Series championships were secured. JJ Yaley had already secured his Xfinity last car championship last week in Texas. So that was already ready for that. But then we got Nemechek's ready and set that up. He was the only person who could clinch at Phoenix. So we had that. And we also had one printed for BJ McLeod on the Cup Series side. That ended up being moot when McLeod was pulled out of the car and Garrett Smithley drove in his place. It appeared that there was some temporary rookie stripes added to the back of the car. A member of the crew actually tweeted me back on that and was telling me about said that was his handiwork there on the back of the car. But that is now set up again, the last car championship that I mentioned earlier. But Stuart Friesen, shades of Ernie Irvan at Sears Point in 1992, coming back from the starting line penalty at the beginning, which also put him in contention for a last place spot before coming back to pull off the victory there. So great job by him punching his ticket in the championship 4. Glad that Ross Chastain finished in the 9th spot to make sure that he transferred as well. So Ross's the Watermelon Man, the Melon Man Challenge extends one more race again. The Toyotas missed the cut, including Austin Hill and Tyler Ankrum. Ankrum had several unscheduled stops all the way towards the end of the race there. Even within, I believe, last 15 laps, I saw him come in. That ended up dropping him back to the 26th spot. It was unfortunate. The Danny Bones situation was really unusual. It was I was standing still in the I trying to remember if I was in the media center or if I was in the Truck Series garage when that happened. But I was listening to the radio on the number 30, and they were just telling him like or actually it was the officials radio. They were telling the 30 to get below the yellow line after he had spun out, and they just told us like get him below the line, get him below the line, and eventually he did, and they didn't throw the caution. So that was an unusual one. I don't know if it was an overreaction to the Bubba Wallace controversy, and we'll get into that certainly as well. That penalty coming up there, maybe NASCAR was in a position where they were saying, okay, look, we have this incident, we didn't throw a yellow for that, so we're not just throwing yellows for everything. Although I'm still trying to figure out the chronology of everything where Bubba Wallace made his statement saying that about his intentional spin there in Texas, and then the penalty that came up much too late in the week there, well after everything was pretty much done and settled back at Texas. Gosh, again, so many things to talk about. The situation with that coming up. I mean, it seems a bit extreme. I know that I remember Dale Jr. getting that penalty at Bristol. I think it was in 2004 where he spun out, and they docked him pretty much right away at that point because they had some evidence of that. I mean, I can see where NASCAR is coming from, where they perhaps are just saying like, look, we can't just have other people doing this, because if they do, other people are going to, try to do it and manipulate the outcome of the race. And NASCAR is already getting a lot of criticism for throwing yellows for no reason, which was also a factor in perhaps the end of Sunday's race. So it's strange that cautions become such a complicated matter all of a sudden. But if you have like this play, it's kind of more of a consequence of the system that we have now in place with the playoffs and with these rounds and with the points being what they are. It's made it so like there's no small mistake anymore. The mistakes can't be so small that you can overcome them anymore. One little thing like that can just completely mess up an outcome. And then even after all that happens, you can have a disqualification and then everything gets turned on its head again. I think it's more of a consequence of just the direction the sport has gone to making every little thing be absolutely critical to a championship, rather than maybe a more broader approach to a full season champion. And just like the little decisions that come up that way are kind of muted in a sense, because then it's all like, okay, we start off here, we win this race. Okay, that puts us good in points, but we got to maintain that point lead the rest of the year. Now it's like, we have to win this race. We have to win this race to get in this round. We have to make sure these guys don't win so they don't get in. We got to make sure we do this. We got to make sure it's so much more complicated. And then, a caution comes out that throws all that up in the air and you have a problem there. So, people can like or not like what Bubba Wallace did and admitting it. And I think once he did admit it, I think NASCAR was kind of in a corner where, okay, they had to, step in and do something there. But at the same time, it's unfortunate because I do think that none of that would even be an issue if we had like a full season champion, or if we had a more global approach to, the races rather than, every little thing being absolutely so critical. I mean, and again, I'll go ahead and mention it now. I mean, the John Hunter Nemechek situation at the end of Sunday's race had absolutely tremendous implications for what happened at the end of this championship. I mean, it set up a situation where Hamlin had the best car and was going to be able to win the race and transfer into the playoffs there. If he had one bad pit stop because of that caution, he completely gets eliminated out of it. And then suddenly it just changes completely. And even though he's been one of the best drivers this entire year, won all these races, stayed up in the points and everything, it just all gets completely flushed down the toilet in one little moment, just because he lets one car go by. I mean, if Kyle Busch beat him, got the drop on him, or anything happened on that, it's just like everything hangs in the balance. Like the pressure there's always been championship pressure, but I think now it's like almost gotten just kind of ridiculous, because now it's just like any little thing could just completely collapse it all, like a house of cards. And it's an unfortunate situation, but obviously for Hamlin, he had to just pull something completely out. One thing I mentioned, when I was standing in Hamlin's pit during the end of that race, his car hesitated for a moment before he gunned it. He was doing a 2-tire stop. He goes, and then jams it in. Like it's, I don't know if it was stalled or if he was just getting it back in gear or whatever. But it could have very easily been a different situation there. And of course having his teammate right in front there, ultimately taking a 4-tire stop, but a gutsy call, had to do it to make sure he stayed up there. and ultimately paid off for him there to get to the championship 4. But yeah, but back in the truck race though, I mean, a good race there. Seemed like there was a bit of a few tangles along the way there. Not as not really a crash fest per se, but a couple of incidents. But even from the outset there were a lot of drivers that were complaining about how difficult it was to pass, and that ended up being kind of a bigger theme throughout the weekend there. But Stuart Friesen, your winner, and the championship 4 now being settled there next week in Homestead. So interesting deal with those guys. It's always fun to watch the trucks. I mean, this is only the second truck race I've actually seen in person. The other one both being at Phoenix the previous year. It was unfortunate John Hunter Nemechek got in the wreck there too. Again, the continuing storyline of Joe and John Hunter competing in the all 3 races the same weekend. It's unfortunate that I think the big reason that kind of got pushed to the back is again because Joe is towards the back of the field in a lot of those runs. But I mean, he's a veteran that's accomplished so much in his career, and it's just great to just have him out there for how few laps it is. But the 8 had a good amount of sponsorship on it, but the 87 didn't really. So he had a situation where Joe had to pull the truck in early. But I was already touching on this originally. Again, big thanks to Joe Nemechek, who was really cool about it when we gave him the certificate there. He was originally going to have me give it to his crew chief and put it in the lounge there because he was going to go out and, of course, see how John Hunter was progressing out there. But ultimately, he took it himself back to the hauler there. So a big appreciation to Joe there on that. I didn't know when printing out these certificates how they were going to be received. I thought it was going to be kind of like, a nice thing to at least give people there. Much like the articles themselves, people could have different feelings about it. I think maybe if it ended up being a driver for a bigger team, maybe it would have been treated a little bit differently. But Joe was a perfect gentleman on that. And JJ Yaley as well, when I spoke to him on Sunday there. And JJ insisted that we get that picture there. I wasn't going to originally do it because I figured he was focusing on getting his game face on. I figured he'd just give it to his PR rep and put it in his hauler or something like that. But he was really cool. He was really really nice on that. We got a great picture there, put on the Twitter feed. So that was really nice. And we did that. Yeah, so we did that. Friday was a really busy day. We got the article put up on that, talking about Joe Nemechek, who did clinch his second consecutive LASCAR Truck Series championship. Looking at the rest of that, let's see. It was unfortunate to see Jordan Anderson have a lot of struggles out there in the 3 truck. He had a really nice new paint scheme on that 3 truck, but trailing some smoke in the early laps, and then ultimately finishing back in the running order there. Derek Kraus as well. I mean, Derek had such a great run, his debut in the Truck Series with the McNally team, but ultimately they ended up competing in the K&N race the next day there. So they continued to maintain a presence there in the race. But moving on to Saturday, I didn't really watch qualifying for the Cup race there. I didn't watch most of the qualifying races or the qualifying sessions, excuse me. Most of that time, I was either in the garage area or in the media center, doing a lot of running around on that. We got some great interviews along the way. Landon Castle was one person that we'd spoken to actually on Friday about Morgan Shepherd and driving for Shepherd this year. That was a big story that I wanted to kind of catch up on because he's kind of had this different experience. I spoke with him on Friday about that, and what was very clear from the interview there was that he and the team are just focusing on growing the team, just getting the team the basics and getting competitive enough to be right up there because they have to. I mean, they're continuing to shrink the field. They know they can't just do start and parks. They can't. Something has to change to make sure that they get their way up the ranks as far as they can do. And Landon has done just an amazing job qualifying that car. Even he wasn't entirely clear where that was coming from, but they always got to get the very most out of that car. And Phoenix was very much the same way. I mean, he was 16th at one point in one of the practices. So, I mean, a great run for the number 89 there, which is the only car in the Shepherd Racing Ventures shop. I didn't realize, which is why it's still running the same throwback scheme that we saw at Darlington way back in September. So Landon Castle getting a great qualifying run, getting the number 89 out there, but was a very interesting last car battle at the back of the field. I actually spoke with a crew member on the JD Motorsports team. We were actually taking picks as to which one was going to be at the back of the field. I believe he was saying it was going to be Yaley since he locked up the championship. I thought it was going to be Dexter Bean on the 92 because 92 we haven't seen that much this year. And usually when Bean drives it, it's going to be a start and park effort. Going down pit road, I again appreciate the viewer that made sure that I went out on pit road and checked to make sure which teams did and didn't have tires. So I went out there and ran down that length and saw the 92 didn't have tires, the 89 didn't have tires, and the 13 didn't have tires. I saw all three of those from about the middle of the curve at turn 4 back to the entrance of pit road. So they were among about 5 teams that were falling back to the back of the field and setting up a situation where they're going to have to be racing each other. Bobby Dale Earnhardt also got sent to the back of the field there, the original last place qualifier in the 38th spot, also driving for Carl Long's team. Tommy Joe Martin sent to the back of the field also with tire issues, this time for flat spotting a tire in qualifying, sending him to the back. I was listening to the radio. I believe the radio traffic that I was listening to was between Bean, Landon Castle, and I believe Yaley, if I remember correctly, and very similar communications on the radio. Beans was the most interesting to me because there was a quote along the way. I didn't transcribe it, but it was like, that's like, okay, make sure you do what Mr. Gosselin tells you. And it's like, just keep the car clean and do what Mr. Gosselin tells you, and it'll be fine out there. And so it was clear that between that and not having tires, that he was going to be exiting the race early as well. I thought he was going to be the favorite for that whole deal. And I didn't realize going into it that Castle actually hadn't finished last in the Xfinity Series before. So you had that whole situation on top of it. I mean, you figure Castle has been running Xfinity races since he was a development driver for Hendrick back in 2007. It's a lot of starts. And then, obviously in the Cup Series, driving for a lot of go or go home teams. That was another subject he brought up there, and is the reason that he's had the success in getting these teams into the show. Or at least one way that he could grasp that. I was interested to see if he was going to bring back the qualifying challenge in iRacing. So keep an eye out for that. For those of you sim racers out there, he kind of intimated that if there was a lot of interest that he might bring that back. Back in 2010, 2011, driving for Gunselman Motorsports and all those other teams, it seemed like that was a real popular deal to, as the way he put it, make people feel the same pressure. It's like, these guys did this. What are you going to do? Like, you're the only car out there and you got to go out there and do it. I think the return of single car qualifying has helped drivers like Castle and teams like Shepard's team get up there and make the very best run they could. And this weekend was certainly another good example of that. Unfortunately, we were also still in a situation where these teams have so little assets, they don't even have sponsors for the tires. We saw this with Jennifer Jo Cobb in the Talladega race in the Truck Series. She got spun out, flat spotted the tires, didn't get any other tires until a couple fans at the infield brought out their credit cards and paid for a set of tires. Other than that, she would have just been done for the day. We can think back to Watkins Glen last year when the rain started coming down. And the small teams, there were about 5 or 6 teams out there sitting on pit road because they didn't have rain tires. So they literally had to sit there and watch pavement dry, waiting for the rain to stop before they could go back out there on their slicks, all the while just losing laps to everybody else there in front of them. And this was rearing its ugly head again with Castle. Somebody told me online that the 89 team has struggled with this a couple times this year, where they had a flat tire and no tires to replace it. So Morgan Shepherd sitting there in the 89 pit towards the end of pit road there. His wife Cindy's there. There's about 3 crew members standing by. The 89 car comes in for an unscheduled stop. Guy looks underneath the rear of the car, goes back. The 89 goes back out, comes back in a second time. This time pulls in behind the wall. Castle comes over the radio and says he has a vibration, and then says it's a flat tire. They go in, and as you can see from the pictures that are in the article, there was the tire was definitely flat back there. Somebody circled the spot. There's about a pin-sized hole about the middle of the tread that where the air had leaked out of there, and they didn't have any air tires, so they were just done. And they listed it as a suspension failure. But it's interesting they didn't list it as tires. I mean, just no tires. I believe that's actually been a reason out for a last place finisher before. Let me pull that up right quick. I'm pretty sure I'd seen that in the past here. Let's see. Yeah, no tires. One time before. I'm trying to remember when that was and kind of get some context on that. But yeah, I mean, unfortunate deal. I mean, at least it gave us a chance to kind of feature Castle and kind of refer back to the interview that we did the previous day. So that ended up being a really interesting article to write about. And Joe Nemechek, I mean, again, continuing the trifecta that he had over the weekend. Unfortunately, he didn't get to run much in the Xfinity race as well, because he was part of a large swath of drivers that were coming into the garage area moments after Castle did. By the time Castle came in, you had Yaley and the number 93 with Bailey Curry swapped in for CJ McLaughlin. They were literally lined up like at a toll lane behind the RSS Racing hauler. Dexter Bean's car was sitting over here, right by the edge of pit road. They were actually working on something and getting him back out there. The 13 car of Chad Fincham, just 1 week after one of his best finishes of the year, they pull out of the race early. Next to him, the number 90 car conked out. So both the Gosselin cars were out. They ended up falling out of the race. I mean, it got really busy back there. The 5 car then got pushed back around the back end of the garage area. Vinnie Miller's team. Miller, the same race last year. I'd seen him be in the same situation as Bean, where they were working under the hood, firing the engine and sending him back out there. It left like some neat tire tracks in the middle of the garage area and getting them back on track. Didn't happen this time. Ended up falling out of the race at that point. So you look at the results from that race and you see a large number of people not just falling out in the first 60 laps, but falling out in a very narrow range between about 30 and 60 laps there. And that's how crazy it was. You had literally had to jump out of the way of the cars in there. But again, mentioning Joe Nemechek, he was actually practicing Mike Harmon's car on Friday, and the number 74, an oil line came loose, which is what sent them into the outside wall and destroyed the right side of the car. That was one where we actually paid for a fan sponsorship to get lastcar.info on the rear deck lid of the car, which Harmon did right on the rear deck lid. And so, but a big shout out to the folks there at MHR Racing for doing that and for helping us get the brand out there. And because one thing that they did, it didn't get really much coverage. The 74, and again, it was a little confusing to explain this, but Mike Harmon's team did have 3 cars on hand. They had the 74 car that got wrecked, and they had 2 versions of the 17 car. There was one that Joe Nemechek was originally slated to drive, that he had practiced in that same session as well when he wrecked the 74 car. But then there was a second one, which was the 17 car that ran last week at Texas, that was not at all set up for Phoenix. It had speedway brakes on it, not much brake power on it. It was very clean. It didn't have any air dams on it or anything. It really had a different look versus the ones that were designed kind of more for a short track, 1 mile track kind of deal, like what they needed at Phoenix. Nemechek ended up driving that Texas car. End up pulling out of the race early. The team member in the garage area said they're running as fast as 19th place car at one point, but then they just had to pull into the garage area because they didn't have any tires, and they just ran out of brakes too, so they didn't have any of that. Joe ran the very longest that he could, but he couldn't finish much better than the other teams that were parking and knew that they weren't going to be able to run much further. So a rough deal there. But again, mentioning with the Mike Harmon team, when they swapped cars, when the Phoenix prepared number 17 that Nemechek was slated to drive ended up being changed to the 74 that Harmon was going to drive, they rewrote every one of the names on the rear deck lid of that car, including mine, and got the last car brand on there. So, again, a big thanks to them on that. That was really cool. That was a really neat deal to kind of jump on top of the Jeremy Clements promotion that we did back at Darlington with those guys. And so anything we could do to help these small teams along the way, it seemed like that was a great opportunity to do that. So we made sure that we jumped in on that, and hope that the weekend went better for them there. But fortunately, the other 2 cars made it home under power. So both Harmon and Nemechek were able to pull it in there that way. But Castle, yes, your last place finisher with a flat tire, listed as a suspension issue, had 2 different sets of shop wheels that went on the car. When they loaded it up there, one looked like really old red rims that were on the old green cars that Shepard used to run. The other ones were more like the chrome rims, like the black car that he ran most recently, I think about 2011, 2012, thereabouts. But a different deal with the Shepard team. Actually, he's run the black car more recently than that. I think it used to be his Mid-Ohio car at one point. But so whereas the truck race, you had, other than Nemechek coming in, it was a bit more sporadic as to who was coming back into the garage area. A couple of people did, but it really wasn't as busy in the garage area, at least for the time that I was back there. Other than that, the Xfinity Series was literally like the middle of an intersection. They were just running in and out of there, and Bean coming in and out of there, and Vinnie Miller and all those guys, and then other guys that were just completely done for the day. It filled up very quickly, even for an Xfinity race, which tends to have a lot of teams fall out in the early laps. That ended up being a very interesting battle to watch. So I'm glad we were there for that. And I hope you enjoyed seeing a lot of the information on that. I did see Yaley working with the crew at that time. I was going to give him his certificate at that point. He looked really busy, so I left it at that point. That's why we ended up doing the interview with him on Sunday instead of Saturday. Lots of good stories to follow along there. Also saw Jeff Green there, of course, working with the 38 team and among the other teams back there. As for the front of the field, Justin Algar, great to see him winning that. When we were there last year, he left just so utterly crestfallen when he had damage to the front of the number 7 car, which ended up costing him a spot in the championship 4. This time it goes the other way when Christopher Bell has some bad luck, both in terms of pit road strategy and then a flat tire. Algar capitalizes on it and takes the victory ahead of some very fast forwards there at the along with him. But great run for Algar and getting into the championship 4. He's going to certainly be one to watch, looking to capitalize on the runs that they have from there. But the big story that I like to follow there in the Xfinity Series side, we mentioned Tommy Joe Martins and the flat spotted tires. That was a real thrill to be able to talk to him there on pit road after that race, because the first time I'd ever interviewed Martins, I mean, we talked a lot on Twitter there, and he's still a great follow there. I know he doesn't do as much of the blog writing as he used to, but which is a shame, because I thought those were really interesting pieces he did there to kind of really give that view of what it's like to be, really fighting and clawing to try to get yourself up there. So Martins this time around was basically one of the first races I'd seen him run in live since Watkins Glen in 2018. He got in a very scary wreck there at the beginning with either a hung throttle or a brake issue that sent him basically straight into the barrier in turn 10. So I was there when they were kind of piecing the car back together. And Martins was very cool to talk to me there and at least break down what happened with the team and how things had gone that weekend. That was the first time we crossed paths, but this time around turned out to be much better circumstances. Martins ended up finishing 17th. That was apparently the number 66 car that Mike Marlar had wrecked at Richmond, which meant that they had to completely rebuild the left front corner of the car. It was an old Toyota Camry. Didn't even have Martin's name on the front windshield. They put a white bit of plastic that covered the name. I think it was Timmy Hill's name on there the most recent time it was run, because it was a very small piece to cover the name up. Must have been a shorter last name. But it was Martins in the car, and he ended up finishing in the 17th spot. In his interview, which you can see in the last car article, he said that he was trying to judge his speed off of Josh Williams and trying to go for a top 15. And Williams did finishing in the 15th spot. That's the interesting. That was a big thing that actually came up with a lot of these teams. I was talking about this on the way back, that a lot of these small teams, there's certain teams that they look out there that they judge their performance off because they tend to run there in the same spot most of the time. And if they follow them up there, they know they're going to more or less finish in that spot. But that definitely served Martins well. He came back from the issues there, finished one lap down, but in the 17th spot. I believe it's his best run since he joined Motorsports Business Management, and the best run he's had in Xfinity since Iowa a couple of years ago when he finished 11th. So great run from there. It was great to be there for that. He couldn't have been happier there. He talked to me, and then he talked to BJ McLeod on pit road after that, and that was really cool to see. David Starr, I had also spoke with him on pit road. He had run out of gas a couple of times, the 52 car. They're trying to work some strategy to gain a few spots, but unfortunately things didn't go very well there. I didn't post that interview yet. I'm still hanging on to that because it may maybe for another article or for a different project I'm working on. He finished in the 25th position there at the end of the day. Starr, he was very friendly, and very personable, as we all know. But he was very exhausted as well. Kind of a continuation of the theme of heat exhaustion this year in the cars this season, even though the Xfinity cars have a different protocol with that. He had a very hard time standing. He was actually putting his hand on my shoulder to kind of steady himself. So I didn't keep him for very long on that. It was clear that he needed to get rehydrated pretty quick as he was talking with Means. But, again, big thanks to him for speaking with me and after the race there, and really interesting group of people. I also talked with Ryan Vargas as well during the race. It was really cool to meet up with him the first time. I know he's been very visible. He says he's really been working on his visibility in the sport and trying to maintain a presence for sponsors and fans. And I told him, it's like, man, mission accomplished, because it seems like whether it's seeing him in the condo with his friends up there at the Roval, or seeing these other races, I think he's doing a good job of actually making sure that he's as visible as possible. He ended up finishing in the 26th spot for Johnny Davis, right ahead of one of his teammates, Garrett Smithley. It's good to meet up with Smithley again too. I spoke with him on race morning there as he was getting ready to drive for BJ McLeod. We had talked with him briefly in Darlington, and again, he was very supportive of the website and really appreciated him taking the time here to talk about his continuing efforts to maintain a presence in the sport and perhaps doing some more with Rick Ware Racing next year. Does that mean a Daytona 500 run? We'll see. It's going to be, he's definitely somebody to be in the running. The sponsorship he has between both Kendall Motor Oil and the Victory Lane Quick Oil Change company, it definitely seems to be paying dividends. Even though he was running the Jacob Company's car, both of those logos were on the 51 car that he ran that weekend. Speaking of great paint schemes, I like the number 66, the brick car that Joey Gase ran, even though they dropped a cylinder, which put them in last car contention before Chase Elliott ultimately took the spot. It was a really neat looking car. I like that they put the different names on there. I don't know how the names got on there. It must have been some kind of promotion between the deals they have at these different tracks for the fan memories deal. I know at Watkins Glen, they had something where you wanted to put a name on a brick that was there. I don't know if they were the same names from that were put on the car, but it must have been something very similar to that. But it reminded me so much of Brett Bodine's brick car from the 2003 Brickyard 400. Had a kind of a similar paint scheme to it there. So good promotion with those guys. But looking further back here, let's see. Greg Galding with a great run in the Xfinity race, finishing in the 12th spot. Ryan Sieg finishing in 13th. We talked about Tommy Joe Martins. Jeremy Clements was right behind Martins there at the finish. I heard the team saying it was like, well, it wasn't terrible out there, but those guys are clearly now already looking to top 10 finishes is now their new goal because they've really stepped it up, especially with that win at Road America. And they're no longer satisfied with the finish like an 18th place run there. So that was good to see them step it up. Matt Mills in the 19th spot there, driving the number 78 again for McLeod. Looking further back at other teams further back, Bobby Dale Earnhardt came from the last spot to finish in the 28th position, finished the car under power, 7 laps down at the finish. Good to see him get there. The 66 car had problems in this race last year when they were wrecked at the big beginning time. I think it was Akinori Ogata that was driving it at that time, but it was not him this time around. Riley Herbst's team did a lot of work there on the track bar after they had the incident at the beginning of the race. They fell into last car contention before even the issues with Landon Castle and some of these other small teams started pulling in. They had to completely patch the left rear of that car back together with black and silver tape to get that thing back out there. Spoke with their PR representative, and it was saying that they had a track bar issue that had to get worked on. They had crew members under there really feverishly working on that. But after some time in the garage area, he ends up finishing the last car to run under power after completing 163 of the 200 laps. So good recovery for Herbst. I know Herbst is getting a lot of criticism about why is he getting this ride full time for Joe Gibbs next year? I mean, you got to bring sponsorship. And it's not just the top rides, it's the lower funded rides too. I mentioned the same thing with Garrett Smithley and his sponsors. And, Ryan Vargas has his sponsors that he brings on board, and all these other guys, get something worked through. You'd like to see different teams out there that can, make do with whatever rides and opportunities they have. But unfortunately, if you're a guy up there and you're just looking to get your face out there and get some laps, sometimes the best you can do is get a start and park run. But the sponsorship is the difference between getting a car that can run the full race and they can sponsor enough to afford tires and equipment and get a decent qualifying run in. Unfortunately, that's just kind of where it all shakes out. I'd certainly like it to be different. Far be it from me to criticize, the likes of, an independent driver or something like that getting in there. But it's just so difficult these days. And it's interesting to see how creative these teams have to get to compete with each other. I want to kind of go back to what I was mentioning earlier about the different teams that drivers were competing against. That was something that definitely came up over and over, especially in Xfinity and Cup. Not so much in the Truck Series, but in the Xfinity Series, there were certain teams that people were competing against. Again, we mentioned Martins looking to kind of guide himself off of the DGM cars that Mario Gosselin provided. But in the Cup Series, it's even more critical because the guys in the playoffs are in a whole other league by themselves. You saw so much in Sunday's race, how the top 8 drivers were pretty much in the top 8 spots the entire afternoon. Kurt Busch tried to get up there. He got a speeding penalty. He was out of it. And it was pretty much the top 8 the whole time, almost to the finish. Some other guys got mixed in there, but that changed things by that point. But in the Cup Series further back, you have different guys that are competing for different things. The people over at the Starcom hauler, they're talking about, okay, we got to look at Carl Long's team. We got to look at Premium Motorsports. We got to look at Rick Ware. We got to look at what those different teams have, what assets they have, and what they're able to accomplish, and how are we doing compared to these guys. BJ McLeod said the very same thing when he was driving for Rick Ware back at Darlington, saying, look, we have to make sure we keep beating the teams that we beat. We got to make sure that we beat teams like Motorsports Business Management. And how are we doing compared to a Jay Robinson, like a Premium Motorsports car? How are we doing compared to Spire Motorsports, which is basically Jay Robinson, but a new organization behind the scenes? It's really interesting to get that battle, because then you really do see, like what JD McDuffie was talking about years ago, that there are these scraps back in the pack that don't get that much attention, but they're just as critical, because these guys, they may not be racing for the win, but racing for 29th may not be like that big of a thing, like visually in the results, or seem that impressive, but that could be a really good day for one of these teams, and saying, look, we got these guys here. We got some notes that we can build from. And then suddenly they're getting even further up. It's going to be really interesting to see where these guys shake out. I know we got some new teams that are potentially coming in next week. We got to see a Floyd Mayweather's team next week and how that's going to shake out. Are they going to be last car contenders? Are they going to play spoilers in the championship battle? Who knows? But that was definitely an interesting theme, and that made me kind of look at the Cup race kind of that direction. Certainly when I was following the Premium Motorsports car with, rather the Spire Motorsports car with Reed Sorensen, and the MBM car with Joey Gase, and seeing the difference in performance, and seeing that Landon Castle was struggling a bit, but still kind of staying ahead of the 66 and the 77, despite the problems that they were having over the weekend. And then ahead of them were the Rick Ware cars, and they were kind of in their group, but all of them racing each other. It becomes a really fascinating thing to look at. I've always said in recent years that, talking about the last place battles, it's more of a framework to talk about how all these teams compete against each other. And it's really obvious now when you really look at these different teams and how they compete against each other. But that was really interesting to see. So between the Truck Series race, where it's pretty much just Nemechek, and then the Xfinity Series, where you had a ton of different start and park teams, where teams just having mechanical issues just flood the garage area. The Cup Series was very much back to the Truck Series again. It was ghost town in the garage area for most of the race, with a lot of the teams that lost those laps at the beginning of the race. You see Reed Sorensen and Gase back there. They lost those laps on track or on pit road with long pit stops or unscheduled stops. The first one that went to the garage area pretty much was Chase Elliott, although Joey Gase spent some time in the garage area as well. Gase was about 20 laps down by the time I got back there after chasing down the 9 car. I don't know if he spent some time in the garage. It's possible he spent that time on pit road. But whatever the reason, by that point, they had lost the engine, and they were done for the afternoon, and things started to fill up from there. Toe end issue on the number 38. They had problems on the David Reagan car, which is unfortunate. One of his last starts of his career. He now goes into his final Cup Series start, at least as a full-time driver, from his announcement earlier this year, driving the number 38 at Homestead. And it'll be interesting to see where Paul Menard shakes out and all that too, as he looks to close out his full-time Cup Series career before Matt DiBenedetto takes over that 21 car next season. The Cup Series garage was a bit different. I found myself kind of jumping back and forth between there and pit road from there. Looking into whichever teams were jumping in there. Brake issues on the number 77. There's a little bit of a nudge and a wink as to why some of these teams fall out of the race. It wasn't quite clear from the Spire Motorsports deal, although Sorensen was out of the car very quickly after that car was back pulled into the garage area. When I talked with Bailey Curry, he said that they had a real bad vibration on the number 93 car in Xfinity, and kind of said it with a big smile. Would not elaborate further on that. I believe it listed a brake failure on that was the reason. Brake failure being a reason for a lot of the ones that were at the back of the field. Actually, looking at the Xfinity Series results here, not just Curry, but also Bean, Nemechek, and Yaley there as well, the back of the field. But that's part of what makes this interesting. That's part of what makes this certainly interesting in the back of the field there. So, Yeah, the Xfinity Series side, I mean, between the Nemecheks, again, the two for through the weekend, it's good to see John Hunter getting the fourth spot. Zane Smith having a great run there, and the number 8 there for JR Motorsports, kind of following on a solid run there in the spring race. Justin Haley was another person that we had talked to as well. As you see, there's not really an interview posted on that. That's because I got very little out of the interview. My plan was to get a lot more information on like what he was going to be doing on the Cup Series side. It was very interesting talking with him because he didn't really want to talk about his Cup Series plans. He didn't want to talk about where he was going to be next year, if he was going to run the Daytona 500, coming back at the first Daytona race after he won there. Is he going to run the All-Star race? If so, is it going to be with Spire? Is it going to be with somebody else? Is a colleague team working on something? Would not speculate on any of that. Now, we're reaching a very interesting time in the season as it now wraps up, where perhaps announcements like that are coming up. And there's a lot of deals and behind the scenes. And the last thing they need is some blabbermouth media person going out there and stealing the march there. So take that as you will. Could be some very interesting news with Haley. But the one thing that was very clear in talking with him is how singularly focused he was on the colleague racing team and doing the very best to close out this year with in the Xfinity Series. Yeah, they got bumps out of the playoffs, but they had a lot that they could be very proud of. They were really working on, fixing the handling on the 11 car at the time that I'd spoken with them. Clearly, whatever they did worked because he ended up finishing 7th at the end of the day there. So a solid finish for him. Haley was going to be was a big story that I want to kind of catch up on there, and there'll be more. You'll see more reason for that. We actually did we coordinated something else with Haley that's going to be coming up here. We'll have some more information on that a little bit later here. Excuse me, in the next week or so. We talked about that. I know there was some requests. I got a request there to talk about Ross Chastain about his Cup Series plans for next year as well. Obviously, since he's been running for Premium Motorsports. After the interview with Haley, I kind of abandoned my plans to talk about that, at least for now. I figured I probably wasn't going to get more information on that. He had also lost his voice during the weekend, too. When he came in after the Truck Series race, he could barely speak. But he insisted he felt good. So it was not, I guess it was more yelling over the radio or celebrating with the crew or something. So he should be fine to go there for next week at Homestead. Trying to think of other things that happened during the weekend there. The Cup Series race, wrapped up so quickly. The trucks in Xfinity, it seemed like I had enough time to actually kind of take in what was going on in there. The Cup Series race, that was so much more challenging since the last place battle was settled so much later, as we've seen in some of these Cup Series races this year. The Chase Elliott deal was very surprising. Just as surprising as I'm sure it was to you guys watching it on TV or even anybody at the track there. The live feed seemed to catch it a moment even before the 7-second delay there for the NBC feed. I just had to, I was just at that point, I was typing in the middle of like tracking what was going on with Sorensen and Gase. I was trying to figure out how many more laps they had to compete. And then big thanks to the Twitter poster that mentioned, like, look, doesn't this put Chase into last car Cup Series contention? And then yes, it did. So I made sure I usually don't do the standings thing first because I like to wait until after the technical inspection results come in, but I had to jump on that early. Luckily there was no change in that. So we had that situation, but here nor there. But when the 9 car hit the wall, I had to jump out of my seat and run back out of there because there were a lot of I had to at least see what was going on there and check that out. A dramatic thing. I'm a bit curious. I haven't watched really much of the TV broadcast yet. I don't know how well it was covered or how well the broadcast was. I kind of tuned out a lot of that, especially earlier in the weekend. But I thought it looked pretty competitive to me. I think it's at least, it does tend to have long green flag runs, but this is a kind of a concern that we've seen more with this package this entire year, in a lot of these different tracks, and if you're not going to get a lot of restarts, you're not going to get a whole lot of, those charges into turns 1 and 2 over at Phoenix there. Now, of course, with cautions being the hot button issue now, these last few days, I'm not professing that they have even more cautions that they have now. I think if anything, I need to have less, but, much like Denny Hamlin was saying, he said like he couldn't even remember the last time that the fastest car actually won a Cup Series race. And, and that's really true. how many times have we seen it where somebody is dominating the race, a caution comes out with 20 to go, field bunches up, something crazy happens, the leader's car gets damaged, he falls back to like fifth, and then there's, that brings out a caution, and then there's another restart, and then like somebody in the back of the field blows a tire, we get forced into overtime, and then, it's a neck and neck, and it's a photo finish, and it's somebody else. It seems like 9 times out of 10, that's been like the result of a race. It's almost like it's a routine at this point, which kind of frightens me a little bit, because it's now, I'm sure, altered the approach that these drivers have, that they have to anticipate that they're going to have an overtime finish. They're going to have to get the most that they can in 2 laps and finish it off. But it's much like what we talked about earlier with the point system and the immediacy of everything, and that there's not a small mistake that can be overcome in these situations. It's just it's fundamentally changed the approach to it, and we'd always wanted to cycle back a bit, but maybe it's something coming up ahead. I mean, we always want to hope that it's going to be something closer to the way it used to be with a full season championship. I think as much as single things like stage racing, like the playoffs and everything, I think it's more global concern now that's kind of created a lot of these questions that people have about racing and the quality of the racing these days. But I do still maintain that while these are big problems, I think it's small solutions that are still the ways to kind of tighten things up from there, whether it be as simple as just getting rid of the front splitter, as simple as making sure you have uniform start times, things that don't seem like they should be that big of a deal, but who knows. But but I mean, really an interesting deal there with that. It'll be a deal there. Let's see. I'm just kind of looking at your comments here. Was Morgan there? Yes, Morgan Shepherd was there. Morgan Shepherd was there with Cindy Shepherd, his wife. I did talk to him very briefly. I don't have a full interview there with that. Again, that was the thing of that. I know it makes, I'm saying this a lot, but there were a lot of people I talked to who were very brief. And I think that was probably just a consequence of the late season, and everybody's just like being told either by their teams or by other teams that they're planning on driving for, not to say a whole lot. I kind of wrote it up to that. It could be just something else, but it's not to say that everybody was like that. I mean, certainly Tommy Joe Martins, Garrett Smithley, JJ Yaley, Denny Hamlin, even, really. I mean, talking with him in about 2010, that was another great moment there, talking with him. He was cool to talk to. There were a lot of people that were very, very friendly. But yeah, Shepard was there. He said he felt a lot better after the bronchial infection that he was struggling with at Darlington. He was walking around fine. He looked good to me. I mean, as far as I can tell, I'm no expert in such things, but he climbed to the top of the pit box. He was sitting there with these big cowboy boots, sitting there just watching that 89 go by and making sure Castle was getting there. And Castle was actually kind of working through the traffic pretty good. So was Yaley in the 38 car. They were actually both kind of advancing pretty well through the field. They weren't lagging back like some of these other teams were. The 66 with Bobby Dale Earnhardt was having all kinds of trouble keeping up, much like Carson Ware did in the Truck Series race, and losing a lap pretty early on in the event. But that was an interesting deal there. Let's see. And yeah, Stephen C., thank you for the suggestion to check on Premium and Chastain's plans on that. No, I wasn't able to talk to Chastain there. Again, when I talked with Haley, that made me kind of change my, I kind of decided not to pursue it at that point. I figured I'd probably get the same reaction. Although Chastain I had enjoyed talking to him back at Sears Point with this whole deal and running back after the Truck Series win. But that was interesting. I'll be watching Rick Ware Racing's prototype debut, says Said Head 2. I don't, when is that going to be? Is that going to be the 24 Hours of Daytona, or is that a different one? I don't follow sports car racing very closely, but the short answer would be yes. I'd be very interested in watching them compete. Depends on where it's seen or all that, but I'd be interested to see that. But yeah, Morgan Shepherd was there. It was good to see him. Yeah, Justin Haley, this is the first time I've ever spoken with him. I arranged a meeting with him through their PR representative. She was very friendly, had no problems with that. he did seem. I mean, he seemed. I don't know. I think it was either a situation where he had his game face on or something. But I mean, I spoke to him. What was that? It was on Saturday. No, it was on Friday. It was on Friday afternoon. Friday, 3:30 in the afternoon. That was the appointment we set up, and we spoke to him there. So it was after practice, but I guess before Xfinity qualifying. So activity was pretty much wrapping up for him. He was still wearing his uniform and everything at the time, so I guess he'd just gotten out of the car. But I mean, you'll find that when you interview drivers, you're going to have some that are going to be much more open about things than others. And I'm not saying Haley was impolite; I mean, far from it. And once I talked more about the Xfinity program, he kind of opened up more at that point. But anything on Cup, he just would not know. He would not talk about it at all, which was very interesting. Very interesting. He kind of joked a little bit about the car cover on the 77 and things like that. And I do have some more information on that. There was another thing that we were arranging with one other reason we were speaking with Haley was another thing that we're arranging for something coming up. So I'm gonna have some more information with that. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very possible they could do something with Cup. That's probably another reason that Haley didn't want to really say anything on that. Maybe there's something very big with that, even a limited Cup Series effort to kind of test the waters a little bit. They seem like they have a very good program. They kind of remind me a lot of. I was talking with Matthew Kohler over at Starcom Racing, one of the people that founded Starcom Fiber, and a colleague strikes me as very similar personality to Kohler, where they're people that are very passionate about their business and very passionate about getting that business exposed in racing and getting up to the Cup Series. And of course, the Kohlers and Starcom are in Cup now, and I can see Colleague doing the same thing. I mean, my gosh, the performance they had at Daytona in July, even with the disqualification, they came up there. They were really doing the very best that they could. So that'd be interesting. They're gonna stream the YouTube thing on the Asian Le Mans YouTube channel. I'll have to pull that up. So that would be interesting to see. Yeah, really the folks. Yeah, I mean, gosh, a lot of the pit crew members are very, very cool. I talked with a lot of them. I mean, there was a lot of people in JD Motorsports and Rick Ware Racing and Starcom Racing. It seemed like I always run into them a lot down there. Certainly the one that was competing in the K&N race was an interesting story during that. But yeah, that's gonna be something with that. As we look ahead there to Homestead this weekend, of course, the next big thing that's gonna be coming up is gonna be the release of 3 Before February, which is our film on Kenny Irwin, Adam Petty, and Tony Roper. That video is now finished. It is now ready for prime time. It is now available this week. Those of you in the Patreon, you already know when it's going to be aired. Special advanced screening for you guys, so you'll have access to that. If you're a member of any level of the Patreon, and if you join any level of the Patreon, you will have immediate access to that video at that release date. We're going to be setting up a premiere that's going to be after Saturday's Xfinity race. We're going to set up an exact time for that, certainly by Friday. So it's going to be in the afternoon, early evening at some time. So definitely expect that. And we'll do a live premiere for that. Much like the Jerry Nadeau video, I'll be participating in that as well. So if you have any questions along the way or anything else you want to mention in the chat, you'll definitely be able to do that. That'll be available for everybody there. We did a little bit of a cross promotion with that at Phoenix. I brought my Kenny Irwin hat out to the track and wore that for a bit. I actually spoke with a member, one of the team's chefs that had previously had some friends that worked with Irwin back in the Robert Yates days there, and said that he really appreciated seeing that hat out there, the bright green deal there, and saying you just don't see anything with Kenny anymore. And that's something that we're really looking to alleviate with that video. I'm very pleased with how it came out. It's gonna be very much in the style of the same videos that I've produced before, but trying to kind of create like a longer piece, kind of take things to kind of the next level there. Again, NASCAR Man's videos that I've been working with on him has kind of been kind of getting a fire lit back under me on that. I'm probably not gonna be doing more videos really over this off season. I have another project I'm gonna be working on, so I'm gonna be kind of getting some more work done on that. But that's really going to kind of be the big focus. We'll talk more about that on Homestead. Big reason I want to debut the video this Saturday is so we can kind of do a kind of a wrap up on not just the NASCAR season, but also talking about that video on Sunday. Once again, everybody a chance to check it out there. So the way I've structured that video, I know in the Nadu video, I had kind of a video at the end where I kind of said my thoughts on it. I decided instead it doesn't really fit in this one. So the video is just going to be just the video itself. And then we'll talk about 3 before February as part of the disqualification show at Homestead. And we'll do that next Sunday here at the headquarters here and wrap everything up on that. I don't know if we're going to be doing some disqualification shows over the off season. We may just do like some Trivia Tuesday deals like we did earlier this summer. That one we did after, I believe it was Watkins Glen. So look ahead to that. So yeah. Oh, Daniel, hey, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on board. Yes, Michael Waltrip's documentary, Blink of an Eye. Thank you, Stephen C. Yeah, big recommendation to check that out. I think actually it's a good, it's touting mine too much to compare it in any way to Blink of an Eye, but I think story wise they fit together. Production wise, the quality in Blink of an Eye is quite a bit better. So I will say a big difference there, but Blink of an Eye is definitely something to check out. I saw that in theaters during the release there. If you haven't seen it already, highly recommend checking it out on film. I actually got a recommendation from Garrett Smithley at the track there. He highly recommended, I believe it's called Race for Your Life or Racing for Your Life. It's the series on Netflix about Formula One, where they track each of the teams, even from the top teams to the bottom ones. When I was talking to him prior to the race, he specifically mentioned that one and recommended checking that out. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm always in the market for a good series to watch when I get back from work. So that's definitely something to check out there. But yeah, definitely recommend checking out Blink of an Eye on that. And I got some other stuff to catch up on this off season, and that'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was a great weekend. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing a whole lot of details from it. Again, I almost thought of doing this tomorrow, but I'm warming up more and thinking about more that we talked about it at the ISM Raceway. But it's such a cool venue. I'd recommend it to anybody that goes there. I know I say that about every track we go to, because if you go to a track, it's automatically going to be better than anything you see on TV. You don't have to listen to running down a dream or sit through commercials or anything. Even when you're in the media center, they have the nice decency to mute the commercials there for you, which is always good. But it's going to be it's a really cool track. I think I think it's worth giving it, as much as I don't like falling into just give it a chance kind of thing. I think let's give it a chance. Let's see what it does for a finale next year. I think it's a very modern and it's a very cool facility. I mean, even the small things like having escalators that take you up to the main grandstands, or they have these things where instead of like a concession stand where you're standing in a long line, they have like parts where it's like a mini mart, and they'll have like these parts underneath the stands where they just have big coolers there. And it's like a cafeteria. You can just walk in there, grab what you want, go up there, pay for it, and you're out of there. I mean, when you're at a racetrack, I mean, it's like, you know this as well as anybody. It's not the same thing as going to a football game where there's going to be a halftime or there's breaks or there's starts and stops. It's action constantly through the whole thing, even with the stage cautions. If you need to get something more to drink, you got to get in and out of there. And the ISM Raceway has really been stepping it up. Same thing with their Wi-Fi. Their Wi-Fi is really good. Even better this year than last year. I think they were finishing off some stuff that wasn't quite finished last year. So a cool track. I think I think it is still better as the semifinal weekend than it probably will be as the championship. But we're already circling on the calendar next year. I'd very much like to cover this again next year as a championship, just to see how different it is. And yeah, you're right, Ultimate 23. I know it probably didn't show very well on TV. It probably didn't. And I can see how that was, and certainly in the Cup race in particular. Because even following the last place battle wasn't very competitive for a lot of it. It was just a lot. We didn't really have a whole lot of people. You just watch these people lose more laps and kind of stay in the same positions. So at least judging from that part of the field, it wasn't like that. But we'll see what's happening on that. But it's yeah. I'm getting more used to the start finish line where it is, but it's not it's still gelling. Like even now, like I still said turn 2 that they dive into, not turn 1. So, having 1 and 2 be back there and 3 and 4 being in front of the new stands. But I think as a fan experience, it's a great track. I really do. And I talked with Last Bro about this when they did the 2017 deal. I know that was before they moved the start finish line. That was a really great race of consequence. I think it has the potential of having, a great finale, because think about all the things that happened in that race in 2017, where, you had Matt Kenseth win what was ultimately the last win of his career. You had Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott coming to blows, building off of the dramatics at Martinsville there where they ran into each other. And, Chase ending up putting Hamlin in the wall. Hamlin blows a tire, wrecks the car. Elliott looks like he's going to win his first ever race. He ends up getting beat by Kenseth. It was, even unusual last place finisher when you had Kyle Larson blow an engine there. I think if you have that race after Martinsville, having Martinsville be like the cutoff there going into that's going to be an interesting transition. I mean, it's something to be said for NASCAR to have as many 1.5 mile tracks as it's had, and then to have the last 2 races of the season not be on 1.5 miles. I mean, that's doing something different. Will it be better? I don't know. I think a lot of the concerns people had about this race is probably more a consequence of the package than the track itself. I think the track has a lot of potential, and perhaps the package has had certain limitations. We've seen this time and time again all year. We saw it at Sears Point where people couldn't pass, even though they brought the carousel back. We saw this at Watkins Glen where Truex was trying to get around Chase and just couldn't do it. They just had a wall of air. You have all these great passing opportunities, but you can't do it with that. And again, what we mentioned with Kyle Busch and him just saying, if you get into the first corner, and that's just it, you're not going to be able to pass anybody any further than that. So, yeah, I mean, a very unusual deal there, but it's worth a try. I hate it for Homestead. Homestead is one that I was really hoping to do one of these days. I'd really like to go back there and do a finale there. I think it's a great setting for it. I like the idea of the championship beginning and ending in Florida. It's got a lot of elements that kind of remind you of Darlington in terms of like hugging that outside line. Very different from Darlington in many respects, of course. I mean, so modern and new, really wide. You can run any number of different grooves and do some crazy stuff there. But all that, all that wall riding and hugging the fence. It's a shame Kyle Larson didn't make the cut again. I mean, it would have been interesting to see what he could do. He might still be a good factor to win the race regardless. I always, yeah, that looked like a fun venue. That was one I definitely had on the list. I don't know if we'll cover it with it being in the spring and just being another race. That's going to be unusual by itself. Talk about, I hope it's not going to take a lot of the luster off of it or anything, but, I mean, but and I wonder, have we heard about the start times yet? Is it going to be a night race still, or are they going to make it a day race? I mean, I think as a day race, it might actually maybe come into a zone and kind of go back to being the way it was in like 2003, 2004, when it put on a good show there for the championship. Maybe you could have a good race there in the meantime. So I don't know. But, yeah, but again, a good weekend up there. I mean, again, when you're at the racetrack and especially when you're covering the races there, I mean, it's always more exciting than anything else. But I will say that it, at least for me, the Xfinity and truck races definitely were the stronger of the three between that and the Cup race. The Cup race, the best part was just the dramatics there at the end. I mean, literally, right when I walked up to the 11 Cruz pit box, the caution came out. I saw those lights start blinking. I was like, oh no. And it's like, here we go. But yeah, it's gonna be it's gonna be interesting. I mean, I think the problem with changing the finale, of course, is you're it changes the complexion of things so much. I mean, you think back to when Atlanta was the finale and all the great moments there, but even back then, I mean, the Hooters 500 in 1992, and I see that Slap Shoes is doing a video on that. I'm looking forward to seeing that as well. It's I'm a little surprised it wasn't released on the 15th. I think it would be better to have it on the day of the actual event, but here nor there. But the deal with that is it's going to be that race itself. It has so much riding on it, but it has a lot of long green flag runs in it. It has a lot of green flag pit stops. It has a lot of that whole deal. If you're going to have if the concern from this weekend's race is that it was boring because nobody could pass or because there was long green flag runs, well, I mean, that happens in championship races. But I'll tell you what, everybody in that media center was on the edge of their seat when Hamlin and Chase Elliott were running side by side there. That was a fantastic battle. And I don't care if it wasn't for the lead. That was something to see. Those guys were absolutely going out there and doing the very best that they could to try to get as many stage points as they could. And, I'm not a big fan of the new paradigm where you have to fill this bucket with points and you have to worry about the regrouping in the points and all that other stuff there. But that was fun to watch. I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, there were people that were like really just glued to that there happening during the race. So that was, I mean, it's unfortunate, much like this same race last year where Chase Elliott and Kurt Busch and Hamlin were having a great run for position. And then all of them ended up wrecking each other on the backstretch. That's the kind of thing that happens. But just imagine having that very same thing happen, but now it's in the championship race and not in the penultimate race. Maybe that's going to have this race come into its own. I mean, you look even further back to when this track had its original configuration in 1989. This is where Stan Barrett put Rusty Wallace in the wall and ended up, almost taking him out of the championship. And he had to kind of scrounge together a mid-pack run at Atlanta to hang on to the slim lead he had over Dale Earnhardt. Imagine if you had those kind of battles in the finale. I think it's got potential. I do hate it for Homestead. I've never been there before. I keep hearing how nice of a facility is and how great of hosts they've been. Maybe this will change back. I don't know, but it's something I'm definitely looking ahead to. That's going to be interesting. But that was fantastic. That battle between Chase and Hamlin, everybody was just like this. Like, I mean, it was, yeah, that was something else. That was something else. I'll probably rewatch that after this. So yeah, really, I mean, and really think about it in terms of storylines between all three of those races. I mean, Stewart Friesen, it seemed like he was pretty much out of the Truck Series championship battle. I mean, I know I've been watching Ross and seeing if he could do anything with Kraft and a lot of these guys that seem to always make it there. But then Friesen goes in there and he just gets it done. Allgaier, same thing. He just seems like he just has all this terrible luck this year, and trying to just have the best performance that he can. Getting overshadowed by other drivers over at JR Motorsports, gets in there, puts an exclamation point on his season, gets in. Denny Hamlin, same thing. I mentioned it just last week at Texas that the problem with the splitter, I said, look, this is going to be the thing that sinks him. It's going to be just like 2010 all over again. But that was the interesting thing, and in his interview, like I mentioned, he didn't say that he's matured as a driver, but it was very clear that that's what he was driving at. That he said that the championship isn't as central to him. And even though his crew chief was, didn't really like the way that he expressed it, like making comparisons to Mark Martin, and no disparaging to Mark Martin at all, undeniably the best driver to not win a championship. I think few would disagree with that. But that the championship isn't necessarily defining him, as a successful driver. He just actually is just looking at, he's looking at his team. He looks at the people that are there, and he's looking at his own skills and where he is in his own career. And he now has the confidence to say, look, we're going to win a championship at some point. And maybe it's going to be this year. And if it's not, it's probably going to be next year because we have good enough people that we're going to do it. And that was an amazing thing for him to say, given the year that he's had, where he's won Daytona, where he had that fight with Joey Logano just a few weeks ago. And, nobody asked this. I thought about asking it. It's like, it's just saying like, how does it feel? Well, I don't like, how does it feel questions. I don't, but finding a way to say, look, like, what does it mean to you to beat Joey Logano and knock him out of the championship? I mean, how does that, I'm trying not to say feel, but how does that taste, I guess? Yeah, the championship isn't as central to him. At least that's what he's saying. Of course, he wants to win the title. All of them do. I mean, you see everybody having their game faces on there in the media center. They're already looking ahead to next week and going in there for all the marbles. I mean, it's one race. You got to go in there and just beat them. Just beat the heck out of them. But it was definitely a different confidence, though, because I remember doing the starting grids back in 2010 and doing that video on the storylines coming in and clipping out that segment where Hamlin's in the car and pounding on his dash because he's furious that the car is out of gas and he didn't see that coming. And as he admitted, he said he wasn't even prepared for the car to be out of gas, and it knocked him off his game, and that carried over to Homestead and the spin that tweaked the front splitter, and it took him out of competition. And Jimmy Johnson just walked to the championship basically at that point. Now with the championship, just ramped up that much more, and you have to basically win the race because you have to beat 3 other guys that are very much capable of doing it. He's very much more relaxed, and he has this confidence in himself and his team. And that was the biggest difference between him now and in 2010. I remember when he won Homestead in 2009, he said in the next couple of years we're going to win the championship, and he seemed calm and he seemed careful of himself. But in 2010, he lost Phoenix, and then he lost the championship, and he went to a sports psychiatrist to talk it out and try to figure out what he needed to do to get his game back. And there's been a lot of years where he's won, but he just hasn't been consistent, or he's fallen short of the final 4, or just had things happening. But this year with this crew, and especially that crew chief, my goodness, that's the first I'd ever heard, from him in person. He will not let Denny fail. He will not let him slow down. And this isn't meant to be like a Denny Hamlin love fest, but clearly he was the big focus there in the media center. This is another interesting story. This is a story that is going to be interesting to see. And Friesen and Allgaier, being the race winners here this past weekend, I think are interesting ones to be watching in the Xfinity and the Truck Series. Kind of for the same way, guys that are perhaps overlooked, and then suddenly they win this race, and now they're like, the giant killers. So is it going to be one of these guys that won a championship before? It could be, but is it going to be the one guy that's never won one before and is, had all these wins this year, and most importantly, didn't get the win taken away from him? They literally had the guy walk in and say the tech inspection was clear. He wasn't even at the top step of the stairs leading out of the media center when that guy came in and said that the inspection was clear. So, big celebration there for the 11 for sure. But a different deal there. But it's gonna be an interesting week. So we're looking ahead to Homestead. Looking ahead to everything next week. And we're gonna jump into all that. I know it's a bit late on this end, so I think I'm actually not going to do the trivia this time right now. It's pretty late over here. It's 10 o'clock Pacific, so I don't want anybody late to work on my account. So what we'll do is I'll let you go for now. We're going to do we'll do trivia and everything in the Homestead show and wrap that up. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much for following us this weekend at the ISM Raceway. This is our last trackside coverage of the year. We're already looking ahead to 2020. But thank you again, everybody, for all your help and making sure that we maintain a presence out there in the media center. And I hope that I was able to provide as best coverage that we could do for you, and get you the stories that you guys are interested in. And we look to continue to do that next season. And in the meantime, we got a championship to settle and a video to premiere. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Lastcar.info is the website. At Lastcar on Brock is the Twitter handle. Oh gosh, I'm falling asleep. Is the Twitter handle, and www.patreon.com/Lastcar on Brock is the Patreon. In the meantime, thank you so much everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next Sunday after the Homestead race. It's about time to crown a champion, guys, not just the Cup Series, but also the Lastcar Cup Series. So thank you again for tuning in, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll see you next Sunday.